Furina de Fontaine has been a meta queen throughout the entirety of Fontaine's life cycle, yet with Natlan approaching, is she going to lose a lot of her value, or is she only going to gain bucket loads? On the whole, is Furina going to survive Natlan? That's what I'm here to discuss with you today. My name is Juice, and let's get into it. The thing is, I have a very hard time believing that she's just going to magically fall off because some new characters are coming out. Her reputation as the best damage bonus buffer in the entire game precedes her. I don't think she really requires any further introduction as such. We all know how amazing she is and how she boosted up the performance of essentially every team in the game. I think it's pretty hard to fathom the idea of her instantly becoming bad to anyone, really. The thing is, Furina buffs damage bonus percent. This is a stat that applies to literally everybody, regardless of their scalings. As in, you could use attack percent, defense percent, or even HP percent, and still enjoy the benefits of damage bonus percent. So no matter what everybody is going to be scaling off of in Natlan, I'm hugely convinced that Furina will actually benefit the new Natlan characters, as opposed to being nerfed due to their existence. But if that's the case, why exactly would I even suggest the preposterous idea of Furina falling off? We need to talk about what happened to all the other Archons. Let's start with the cutest one, Venti. Beloved Venti reigned over his time in the meta like an absolute king. He easily wiped the floor with all the trash mobs that were running around the place back then when he first came out. Then the Inazuma Nation attacked. His grouping capabilities didn't work on the heavier robots and big Kairagis, and he wasn't even able to group Spectres later on, despite them being quite a small mob, and the Abyss shifted massively to favor Kazuha instead of Venti, so he fell off hard. There was no smooth transition whatsoever, just a new region, then bang, Venti's been kicked out of the meta. Then Sumeru rolled around and Genshin decided to ease up on the poor lad a little bit. First off, Inazuma enemies got nerfed. Venti could now group Kairagis, and thank God that the guy can group up Spectres now. He still can't group up the heavier robots, but he doesn't really have to. He got the concessions needed to make him feel decent again, in my opinion. Plus, he was able to group a shocking amount of Sumeru enemies, if not literally all of the non-robot Sumeru enemies. I mean, shoot, he can actually group up those desert Doritos. This continued into Fontaine, and nowadays, yeah, I think Venti's pretty decent. Quite underrated even. People treat him like he's unplayable garbage when in reality, he's just a decent comfort pick that really isn't a must pull by any means. So Venti went from top tier to garbage to decent. Then Zhongli. He was always a perfectly fine comfort choice throughout his era, an absolute godsend to mobile players or just anybody in general who isn't that good at the game, but he had a seriously rough patch in Sumeru. Afterwards though, he gained plenty of use cases in Fontaine, and nowadays is much like Venti in the sense of being a comfort pick that isn't a must pull by any means. Raiden was literally insane for the whole of Inazuma. She was a little underrated at first even since the weird elemental aura abyss made C0 Raiden feel weak. She was extremely strong for her time, pretty good in Sumeru gaining Hyper Bloom as a new use case, and then she fell off in Fontaine in my opinion. A C0 Nervalette is on par with a C2 Raiden, my guy. You have to C2 Raiden if you want her to keep up with the huge DPS numbers of current Fontainian DPS characters. So imagine how C0 Raiden feels. My god, it's either you play her as a driver, in Dendro, or you just don't play her. Natlan's only going to raise this power bar more, so Raiden's DPS is only going to feel worse and worse over time at C0. If you have a Kuki Shinobu for Hyper Bloom and you have other DPS characters that you can play, then Raiden is literally useless. You only use her if you are a newer player who needs a flexible character who can work in many teams, which is what Raiden is. Otherwise, if you want an Electro DPS, literally just play Chlorand. A lot of people are going to get angry at this because Raiden's such a beloved character, but I'm just telling it how it is. Even so, it'd be disingenuous of me not to mention that she is still serviceable, very easy to use, which is a huge plus, comfortable thanks to your excellent battery and capabilities, and can work in plenty of places alongside her good Dendro-related capabilities. Raiden is not horrible. I'm just saying that she did in fact fall off at C0, and even though her C2 to 3 is still competitive, I wouldn't go and pull her cons now unless you're a huge Raiden simp. Invest all that into C0, R1, Fontaine, and Natlan DPSs instead. So far, we've got Venti being alright after falling off, Zhongli being decent, and Raiden being pretty decent after falling off. Yet this next one is interesting. Nihira did not fall off at all in my opinion. She didn't really gain many new use cases, but she's still equally as good as she was before. I think it helps that the main teams she works in, namely Alhaitham and Nilou teams, are still very relevant team comps that matter even now. Nervalette can even run in a good Bountiful Cores Bloom team, and her EM buffing is extremely strong to this day. I would say that Nihida, impressively enough, has stayed the same in value, and soon she's about to rise in value because Kinich is a Dendro character, and I imagine that she'll have some kind of synergy there. Emily also came out recently, and I strongly believe that Mualani is going to be a Burgeon Vape DPS, not confirmed, I'm just saying, and since Nihida buffs EM, Mualani may seriously appreciate that. So we have 4 peculiar instances here. One got nerfed to oblivion, yet came back feeling pretty alright. One has pretty much always been good, but was shafted during one region. One is just okay if you think critically for a moment and realize how few use cases they have, the more characters that you have. Essentially good for new players while getting increasingly worse for those with more fleshed out character rosters. One has somehow managed to not get any worse or any better for an entire region's life cycle. They are quite literally just chilling there. So what route is Furina going to take with all this being kept in mind? One thing both Raiden and Nihida have, which keep them both relevant in the current meta, is great flexibility. It's why Raiden can still be comfortably used as, say, a double Hydro driver for example, even if her DPS roles have fallen off. And Nihida simply just is the identity of Dendro itself, so anytime that the element is brought up, she will most likely end up taking off. Furina is the textbook definition of flexible, I swear to god. I mean, actually, is she? Furina doesn't look all that elastic if I'm being entirely honest. Horrendous jokes aside, it's worth mentioning that Furina didn't only buff Fontaine characters, she buffed up quite literally every regional group of characters, which is mega impressive. Basically, everybody got a massive chunk of an upgrade thanks to her. Because of this, Furina will always have relevance for older characters, and there are just way too many teams in the game that can use her to great effect for her to simply just disappear and never be relevant again. I think what would be more pressing to ask is if a comfortable team-wide healer is going to be relevant in the teams of Natlan characters. After all, when it comes to Furina, no healer, no cigar, but I'd find that kind of strange considering that healers are so commonplace for almost every team in the game. Then again, offense is the best defense, and Fontaine's DPSs have been very strong thus far. If Natlan raises the power level once more, then it isn't out of the question for early abysses to quite literally just be, allow me to knock out most of the enemies before they can even touch me, harkening back to the olden days back when healers were just considered kind of irrelevant because enemies didn't hit hard enough to justify the DPS loss that they often were. Though I kinda doubt this would be the case. The Abyss lineups and enemy mechanics have evolved since then, and I'd be kinda surprised if we really did just go back to enemies barely being able to lay a scratch on you. We could simply just go back to the shielder meta, after healers were being shielded for so long by Hoyo during Sumeru's we self-damage you era, and Fontaine's we like to play ball with HP era. I think that in the future, Furina is honestly just going to stay the same in value, much like Nihida did. I don't expect her to gain oodles upon oodles of new synergies, since Nihida didn't really gain any either, and she's the reference point that we're working with. She may gain some new synergy with the newer Natlan units, I wouldn't be surprised if she did after all, but as always, a new region means that Hoyoverse is gonna want to focus on the latest and greatest. And for that reason, I don't think that they'll put any particular emphasis on making sure that the characters synergize with Furina, but I'm sure that all future units will be designed with Furina in mind, and that may be for the better or for the worse. We will have to see. When I say, quote-unquote, designed with Furina in mind, I don't mean that Hoyoverse will make sure that every single new unit ever will work with her. What I mean rather is that Hoyoverse is going to be balancing the future new meta around the fact that this complete and utter meta behemoth is running around the place. I think that Furina had an excellent run, and even if she were to fall off, she'd be stepping down after an absolutely excellent run as the queen of all things meta. I think that she isn't gonna just be immediately killed off per se, but I can see her slowly but surely being phased out of the meta for now to avoid fatigue of the same character team archetypes being used over and over again. Naturally, the way they handled it with Nihida, by not really adding any new Dendro characters right up until Emily. Remember to join my Discord and follow my Twitter, both of those links will be down below in the pinned comment and description. My Ko-Fi will also be in both of those places if you're interested in supporting me. Otherwise, feel free to check out my channel memberships, which I've opened up recently as of posting. You can gain access to some cool emotes, more perks and tiers coming soon. I also stream on Twitch. Check me out at twitch.tv/JuiceChanYT if you want to catch me live sometimes playing Genshin, Wuthering Waves, Honkai Star Rail, and much more other things. Hopefully this video was able to give you some food for thought regarding Furina's future once Natlan comes out in the Genshin Impact meta. This has been Juice, signing out, and it's a real shame that it's the 7 and not the 8, because then we could have 2 full Archon teams.